The sharp knock on the door jolted Lia Carter awake. She squinted at the clock on her nightstand. 6:47 a.m., too early for visitors, especially in her cramped Portland apartment. Rubbing sleep from her eyes, the 23-year-old barista stumbled out of bed, her oversized hoodie dragging across the hardwood floor. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her shift at Brew Haven didn't start until 9, and her few friends knew better than to show up unannounced before coffee. The knock came again, insistent, almost impatient. Lia peeked through the peephole. No one. Just the dim, flickering light of the hallway and the faint hum of the city waking up outside. She hesitated, then cracked the door open, chain still latched. On the worn welcome mat sat a small cardboard box, no bigger than a shoebox, with no label, no name, nothing. Her stomach tightened. She unhooked the chain and pulled the box inside, locking the door behind her with a quick twist of the deadbolt. The box was light, unassuming, its edges softened by time. Lia set it on her tiny kitchen counter, next to a half-empty mug of yesterday's coffee. She grabbed a butter knife from the drawer, her makeshift weapon of choice, and sliced through the yellowed tape. The flaps popped open, revealing a single item, a faded medical file, its corners curling like it had been forgotten for decades. She frowned, pulling it out. The cover was stamped with a logo she didn't recognize, a crescent moon over the word Crestmont, and below it, in typed black ink, her name, Lia Carter. Her breath caught. She flipped the file open, her fingers trembling slightly. The first page was a patient intake form, dated October 12, 2001. She'd been 3 years old then. The details were sparse: height, weight, a scribbled note about a minor fever. But at the bottom, under parent/guardian, was a name she'd never seen before: Kaitlyn Reed. Not Mark or Sandra Wilson, the couple who'd raised her, who'd told her she'd been adopted from a foster home after her birth mother abandoned her. Kaitlyn Reed. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Lia's knees felt weak. She sank into a chair, the file still clutched in her hands. Her whole life, Mark and Sandra had painted a simple picture. They'd taken her in out of kindness, a quiet act of charity for a girl with no one else. She'd never questioned it. They weren't warm. Mark's stern lectures and Sandra's tight-lipped silences had been her normal, but they'd provided a roof, food, a bed. Now, this file suggested something else entirely. Who was Kaitlyn Reed? And what was Crestmont? She grabbed her phone and typed Crestmont Clinic, Portland, into the search bar. The results were thin: a few archived forum posts, a grainy photo of a squat brick building with boarded-up windows, and a single news article from 2005. She clicked the article, her heart thudding louder with each word she read. Crestmont Clinic shuttered amid whistleblower scandal, the headline blared. The piece was short, vague. A nurse named Kaitlyn Reed had accused the clinic's director, Dr. Edward Sloane, of conducting unapproved drug trials on vulnerable patients. The claims were dismissed, Reed was discredited, and the clinic closed quietly. No follow-up. No justice. Lia's mouth went dry. The dates lined up. She'd been adopted in late 2001, just after the scandal broke. Was Kaitlyn Reed her real mother? And if so, why had Mark and Sandra lied? She scrolled back to the file, flipping through the pages for more clues. Most were medical jargon, charts, dosages, codes she didn't understand, but tucked into the back was a folded note, its edges brittle. She unfolded it carefully, her breath hitching as she read the shaky handwriting. They're still watching. Don't trust anyone. The room seemed to shrink around her. She stood abruptly, pacing the small space between her counter and the couch. This wasn't just a file, it was a warning. But from who? And about what? Her mind raced to Mark and Sandra. They'd always been private, almost secretive. Mark with his late-night calls in the garage, Sandra with her locked desk drawer Lia had never dared to touch. Had they known about Crestmont? About Kaitlyn? She dialed Mark's number, her thumb hovering over the call button before she pressed it. The line rang twice before his gruff voice answered. Yeah? It's early. What's wrong? I got something today, she said, keeping her tone steady despite the tremor in her chest. A medical file. From Crestmont Clinic. It has my name on it, and someone else's. Kaitlyn Reed. Who is she, Dad? Silence stretched on the other end, thick and heavy. When Mark finally spoke, his voice was clipped, colder than usual. Where did you get that? Doesn't matter, Lia shot back. Why didn't you tell me? Who's Kaitlyn Reed? You're digging into things you don't need to know, he said, each word sharp. Drop it, Lia. For your own good. The line went dead. She stared at the phone, her pulse pounding in her ears. That wasn't an answer, it was a wall. Mark had never been open, But this was different. He sounded scared. Or angry. Maybe both. She glanced at the note again. They're still watching, and a chill crept up her spine. Was he part of they? The day blurred past. Lia called in sick to work, too rattled to steam lattes and fake smiles. Instead, she sat cross-legged on her floor, the file spread out like a puzzle she couldn't solve. She needed answers, real ones, not Mark's evasions. The library downtown had archives, old newspapers, public records. If Crestmont had a scandal, there'd be more than one article. She grabbed her jacket, stuffed the file into her backpack, and headed out, locking the door twice behind her. The walk to the Portland Central Library was brisk, the October air biting at her cheeks. She kept her head down, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A black sedan idled at the corner too long. A man in a gray coat lingered near the bus stop, his eyes flickering toward her before darting away. Paranoia, she told herself. Just paranoia. But the note's warning echoed in her head. Inside the library, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights steadied her nerves. She found the microfiche room, a dusty corner most people ignored, and requested records from 2001. The librarian, a bored woman with a name tag reading Clara, handed her a box of film rolls without a word. Lia loaded the first one, scrolling through grainy headlines until she found it. October 20th, 2001. Nurses' claims against Crestmont Clinic fall apart. The article was longer than the online version, detailing Kaitlyn Reid's accusations, experimental drugs, coerced consent, women who disappeared from the ward. Dr. Edward Sloane called her unstable, and the state board agreed. Kaitlyn was suspended, then vanished from the story entirely. Lia leaned back, her mind spinning. This wasn't abandonment. Kaitlyn hadn't given her up, she'd been silenced. And Mark and Sandra had taken her in right after. Why? She printed the article, tucking it into the file. As she stood to leave, her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. No signature. No clue who sent it. She froze, her eyes darting around the empty room. The librarian was gone. The hum of the lights felt louder, oppressive. She shoved the file into her bag and hurried out, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. This wasn't just about her past anymore. It was about something bigger, something still alive and watching. And Lia wasn't sure she could stop, even if she wanted to. Lia Carter barely slept at night. The text, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it," burned into her mind, replaying like a broken record. She'd turned her phone off, shoved it under her pillow, and double-checked the locks on her apartment door, but the unease clung to her like damp air. The faded medical file from Crestmont Clinic sat on her coffee table, its secrets spilling out in jagged pieces she couldn't yet fit together. Kaitlyn Reid, her biological mother, hadn't abandoned her, she'd been silenced. And Mark Wilson, the man she'd called dad for 20 years, knew more than he'd let on. His curt warning over the phone, "Drop it, Lia, for your own good," had only fueled her resolve. By sunrise, she'd made up her mind. She wasn't dropping anything. She needed proof, something solid to confront the shadows creeping into her life. The Portland Central Library had given her a start with that 2001 article, but it wasn't enough. She needed the full story, court records, witness statements, anything that could explain why Kaitlyn disappeared and how Lia ended up with the Wilsons. She pulled on her boots, grabbed her backpack with the file tucked inside, and headed back to the library. The streets were quiet, the early October fog curling around the corners of brick buildings. She kept her hood up, her pace quick, her eyes scanning for that black sedan or the man in the gray coat from yesterday. Nothing. Yet. The library's microfiche room was as empty as before, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Clara, the librarian, raised an eyebrow when Lia requested more records but slid the box over without comment. Lia settled in, the hum of the machine grounding her as she scrolled through 2001 headlines. She found another article, dated November 3rd, Crestmont nurse committed after breakdown. The words hit her like a slap. Kaitlyn Reid, described as a promising young nurse, had been institutionalized after her accusations against Dr. Edward Sloane fell apart. The piece painted her as unhinged, claims of paranoia, delusions, a public meltdown at a hearing. No mention of the patients she tried to protect. No follow-up on Sloane. Just a tidy end to a messy story. Lia's hands tightened on the machine's knobs. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a setup. She dug deeper, pulling records from the weeks that followed. A small notice in mid-November caught her eye. Crestmont Clinic closes doors amid financial strain. The timing was too perfect. Kaitlyn discredited, the clinic shuttered, and Lia adopted by the Wilsons all within months. She printed the articles, her mind racing. Mark had been a lawyer back then, hadn't he? She vaguely remembered him mentioning corporate clients, cases he never talked about at home. Was Crestmont one of them? Was he part of the cover-up? She needed to hear it from him. No more evasions. She stepped outside the library, the cold biting at her knuckles as she dialed his number again. The line rang 3 times before he picked up. "Lia," he said, his voice flat, like he'd been expecting her. "I told you to let this go." "I found articles," she said, cutting through his tone. "Kaitlyn Reed didn't abandon me. She was a nurse at Crestmont, and she got locked away after calling out Dr. Sloane. You adopted me right after. What do you know, Dad? Were you involved?" A long pause. She could hear his breathing, slow and deliberate. "You're chasing ghosts," he finally said. "Kaitlyn was unstable. Dangerous, even. We took you in because she couldn't care for you. That's the truth. Then why does it feel like a lie?" Lia snapped. "Why won't you tell me about Crestmont? Were you working for them?" "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Stop this, Lia, or you'll stir up trouble you can't handle." He hung up before she could respond. Her chest tightened. That wasn't denial, it was deflection. She paced the sidewalk, the articles crinkling in her bag. Mark wasn't just hiding something, he was scared of it. She needed more than old newsprint. She needed Kaitlyn's side of the story, if there was any left to find. Back inside, she switched to the computer terminals, searching for Crestmont's aftermath. A buried forum post from 2010 mentioned a facility called Greenvale, a long-term care home in rural Oregon where some Crestmont patients might have been transferred. No address, just a name. It was a lead, thin, but real. As she scribbled Greenvale into her notebook, a shadow fell over the desk. She glanced up. A man stood at the end of the row, mid-30s, gray coat, hands in his pockets. He didn't move, just watched her. Her pulse spiked. She'd seen him yesterday, hadn't she? Near the bus stop. She grabbed her bag and stood, keeping him in her peripheral vision as she headed for the exit. He didn't follow, at least, not that she could see, but when she stepped outside, that black sedan was back, parked across the street, engine idling. Lia ducked into an alley, her breath fogging in the chill. She wasn't imagining this. Someone was watching her, and they didn't like what she was digging up. Back at her apartment, she bolted the door and sank onto the couch, the file trembling in her hands. She flipped to that brittle note again. "They're still watching. Don't trust anyone." It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was a fact. Her phone buzzed on the table. Another text from an unknown number. "You were warned. Next time, we won't ask nicely." She stared at the screen, her heart hammering. This wasn't just about Kaitlyn or Crestmont. It was personal. Whoever they were, they knew where she lived, what she was doing. She thought of Mark's warning, his cold edge. Was he part of this? Had he always been? She couldn't stay here, not tonight. She stuffed the file, her phone, and a change of clothes into her backpack, her hands shaking as she worked. She needed a plan, somewhere safe to think, to figure out her next move. The lock on her door rattled. A soft, deliberate scrape, like someone testing it. Lia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She grabbed a kitchen knife, not the butter one this time, and crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty again, but the sound had been real. She waited, ears straining, until silence settled back in. Whoever it was, they'd left for now. She slid down the wall, knife still in hand, her mind a storm of questions. Kaitlyn hadn't just been silenced, she'd been erased. And Lia was next unless she found the truth first. She couldn't call the police, not without proof, not when she didn't know who to trust. Mark's words echoed. Trouble you can't handle. Maybe he was right about the danger, but he was wrong about her. She wasn't backing down. Greenvale was her only lead, a 3-hour drive north if the forums were accurate. She didn't have a car, and her barista paycheck wouldn't cover a rental. But she'd figure it out. She had to. Because whatever Crestmont had buried, it wasn't dead, it was awake, and it was coming for her. Lia Carter didn't dare stay in her apartment after the lock rattled. The knife stayed in her hand until dawn, her back pressed against the wall, ears straining for any sound beyond the hum of the fridge. When the first gray light seeped through her curtains, she moved. She stuffed her backpack with the Crestmont file, the printed articles, and that chilling note. "They're still watching." Then slipped out, hood up, eyes darting to every shadow. The black sedan wasn't outside, but the memory of it lingered like a threat. She couldn't shake the feeling that every step she took was being tracked. Greenvale was her destination, the long-term care home in rural Oregon where Kaitlyn Reed might still be alive. It was a 3-hour drive, and Lia had no car, no savings, just $43 in crumpled bills from her last shift at Brewhaven. She needed money, fast, and she couldn't risk going back to work where they might find her. The diner across from the library had a help wanted sign in the window, its neon buzz a faint promise. She crossed the street, her breath fogging in the crisp Portland morning, and pushed through the door. The manager, a grizzled man named Pete with a coffee-stained apron, sized her up. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, not unkindly. "I haven't," Lia admitted. "I need cash. I'll scrub dishes, mop floors, anything. Just a few days." Pete squinted, then nodded. "Start now. $6 an hour, plus tips if the girls share." It wasn't much, but it was enough. She worked 3 days straight, 12-hour shifts of scalding water and grease, her hands raw by the end. She kept her head down, spoke to no one, and slept on a cot in the diner's back room when Pete offered. By the third morning, she'd scraped together $132. A one-way bus ticket to Greenvale cost $28. She bought it at the terminal, her heart pounding as she scanned the crowd for gray coats or familiar cars. None appeared. At 10:15 a.m., she boarded the bus, the file tucked inside her jacket, and watched Portland fade into mist. The ride was quiet, the scenery a blur of frostbitten fields and sagging barns. Greenvale sat off a winding road, an hour past Eugene, its faded sign barely legible against a backdrop of skeletal trees. The building loomed like a relic, peeling paint, cracked windows, more asylum than care home. Lia's stomach knotted as she stepped off the bus, gravel crunching under her boots. She had no plan beyond finding Kaitlyn, no idea if she'd even be allowed inside. She adjusted her backpack and walked up the hill, the wind slicing through her thin layers. At the front desk, a woman in faded scrubs, name tag Julia, barely glanced up from her clipboard. "Visiting hours end at 4, she muttered. "I'm here to see Kaitlyn Reed," Lia said, steadying her voice. "I think she's a patient." Julia's pen paused. She looked up, eyes narrowing. "Relation?" Lia swallowed. "I'm her daughter." A beat of silence. Julia studied her, then picked up the phone, murmuring something too low to catch. She hung up and pointed down the hall. "Room 14. Keep it short. She doesn't get visitors." Lia nodded, her pulse racing as she followed the directions. The hallway smelled of bleach and stale air, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. She reached the door, half open, a sliver of daylight spilling out, and pushed it wider. Kaitlyn Reed sat by the window, thin and pale, her dark hair streaked with gray. She wore a shapeless gown, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. She didn't turn as Lia stepped inside. "Kaitlyn." Lia's voice trembled, softer than she'd meant it to be. The woman's head tilted slowly, her eyes, sharp, hazel, alive, meeting Lia's. For a moment, they just stared, the air thick with something unspoken. Then Kaitlyn's lips parted. "You're mine?" she whispered, barely audible. Lia's knees buckled. She crossed the room, dropping into the chair beside her. "I think so. I'm Lia. I found a file, your file, from Crestmont. They told me you abandoned me, but that's not true, is it?" Kaitlyn's gaze flickered, a spark of recognition cutting through the haze. She leaned forward, her voice low, urgent. "No. They took you. Sloane. Edward Sloane. He ran Crestmont. I saw what he did, drugs, experiments, women who didn't consent. I reported him. They called me crazy, locked me away. Your father, Mark Wilson, he was their lawyer. He made sure I stayed quiet." Lia's breath hitched. Mark. She'd suspected he was tied to it, but hearing it from Kaitlyn, her mother, made it real. "Why me?" she asked. "Why did they take me?" Kaitlyn's hands clenched, knuckles white. "Punishment. Proof they could win. I was pregnant when they committed me. They waited until you were born, then handed you to him. I screamed for you, but no one listened." Her voice cracked, eyes welling with tears she didn't let fall. "I didn't know where you went. I didn't know if you were alive." Lia reached out, her hand hovering before resting on Kaitlyn's. It was cold, fragile, but it tightened around hers. "I'm here now," she said, her throat tight. "I found you, and I'm not letting them get away with this." Kaitlyn's eyes darted to the door, then back to Lia. "You can't fight them with words. They've got money, power, Sloane's fund, Sloane Wellness, it's still out there. They buried me, others too. If you go after them, you need evidence, hard evidence. or they'll bury you next. Lia nodded, her mind already spinning. The file was a start, but it wasn't enough. She needed records, witnesses, something they couldn't deny. "Where do I look?" she asked. Kaitlyn hesitated, then leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Crestmont's old office. Downtown Portland. They moved files there before it closed, patient logs, memos. If anything's left, it's there. But be careful. They watch everything." A knock at the door jolted them apart. Julia poked her head in, her expression tight. "Time's up." Lia stood, reluctance heavy in her chest, but Kaitlyn squeezed her hand one last time. "Find it," she murmured. "For us." Outside, the wind howled down the hill, cutting through Lia's jacket. She didn't head straight for the bus stop. She sat on a splintered bench, the weight of Kaitlyn's words sinking in. Mark hadn't just adopted her, he'd stolen her, a trophy from a battle Kaitlyn lost. And Sloane, still out there, hiding behind his polished foundation. Rage simmered under her skin, but so did fear. That text, the sedan, the lock, they weren't warnings anymore. They were promises. She pulled the file from her bag, flipping to the note again. "They're still watching." Kaitlyn had confirmed it. They, Sloane, Mark, whoever else was left from Crestmont. She needed to move fast, smarter than they expected. The old Crestmont office was her next stop, but she couldn't go unprepared. She needed help, someone who knew how to fight monsters like this. As the bus rumbled back toward Portland, Lia stared out the window, her reflection a ghost against the darkening sky. She wasn't just a barista anymore. She was a daughter with a mission, and she'd tear their lies apart, one truth at a time. Lia Carter stepped off the bus in Portland just as dusk settled over the city, the skyline swallowed by a thick October fog. Her encounter with Kaitlyn Reed, her mother, burned in her mind, every word a spark igniting her resolve. Mark Wilson, the man she'd called Dad, wasn't just complicit. He'd orchestrated her theft, a pawn in Edward Sloane's game. The old Crestmont office held the key, patient logs, memos, proof of the experiments Kaitlyn had exposed. But Lia knew she couldn't storm in alone, not with whoever they were, watching her every move. The text messages, the sedan, the rattled lock, they'd escalated from threats to a hunt. She needed an ally, someone who'd faced this kind of darkness before. At a corner payphone, her own cell too risky now, she searched online for journalists tied to Crestmont. One name surfaced, Evan Pierce, a freelance investigator who'd written a scathing piece on the clinic's closure in 2005. His blog had gone quiet years ago, but a cached contact page listed an email. Lia typed a quick message from a burner account she'd set up at the library. "I have info on Crestmont and Sloane Wellness. My mother was a victim. I need help." She hit send, her breath fogging the glass booth, and waited. An hour later, her inbox pinged. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 12th and Burnside. 9 p.m. Come alone." No signature, just coordinates. Lia's gut twisted. Trust was a gamble, but she had no choice. She grabbed a coffee from a 24-hour diner to steady her nerves, then headed out, the file tucked tight against her chest. The warehouse district was a maze of rust and shadows, the air heavy with oil and damp concrete. Evan Pierce leaned against a graffiti-streaked wall when she arrived, late 30s, wiry, with sharp eyes and a faded leather jacket. "You Lia?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah," she said, scanning the empty street. "You wrote about Crestmont." He nodded, lighting a cigarette. "Tried to. Got shut down fast. Threats, hacked accounts." "You said your mom was a victim." "Kaitlyn Reed." Lia's breath caught. "You know her?" "Heard of her. She was the whistleblower who didn't break." "What VE you got?" Lia handed him the file, watching his face harden as he skimmed Kaitlyn's intake form and the note. "This is big," he muttered. "But it's not enough. Sloane's crew, his foundation, they've got layers of cover. We need hard proof." Kaitlyn said the old Crestmont office downtown might still have files, Lia said. Logs, memos, something they couldn't scrub. Evan exhaled smoke, eyes narrowing. "That's a long shot. Place has been abandoned since '05. But I've heard rumors, boxes left behind, too risky to move. You up for a break-in?" Lia hesitated, then nodded. "For her?" "Yeah." They moved at midnight, Evan leading her through back alleys to a squat, boarded-up building on 5th Avenue. The Crestmont logo was faint on a rusted plaque, barely legible. He pried a loose board from a side window with a crowbar, and they slipped inside, flashlights cutting through dust and darkness. The air was stale, thick with mold. Filing cabinets lined the back room, some tipped over, papers spilling like confetti. Lia's heart raced as she rifled through drawers. Most were empty, but one held a USB drive, its label scratched but readable, SW Archives. Evan plugged it into a battered laptop he'd brought. The screen flickered to life, revealing folders, patient records, trial notes, internal memos. Lia opened one labeled K. Read, audio files. Kaitlyn's voice crackled through, strained but defiant. Sloane injected them with untested sedatives, no consent. I saw the logs. Another file, a memo signed by Mark Wilson, subject care neutralized. Child placement secured. Recommend permanent containment. Lia's stomach dropped. It was all there, proof Mark had buried Kaitlyn and stolen her. Jackpot, Evan whispered, but his face paled as headlights swept through the window. Tires crunched outside. We've got company. Lia yanked the drive free, shoving it into her pocket as Evan pulled her toward a back exit. Footsteps echoed, boots, heavy, deliberate. They ducked behind a cabinet as two men in dark jackets entered, flashlight beams slicing the room. Check the drives, one grunted. She's been here. Lia's breath hitched, they knew. Evan signaled her to move, and they bolted for the door, the men shouting behind them. A trash-strewn alley swallowed their escape, but a gunshot cracked the night, splintering brick near Lia's head. She stumbled, Evan yanking her upright. They ran until the sounds faded, collapsing behind a dumpster blocks away. There's Sloane's, Evan panted, checking his phone. Private security. I've seen him before. His screen lit up, a text. You're next, Pierce. He cursed under his breath. Lia clutched the drive, her hand shaking. They'll kill us for this. Not if we're smart, Evan said, eyes hard. We've got leverage now. But we need to hide it, split it up, send copies where they can't reach. Her phone buzzed. Mark's number? She answered, voice steady despite the adrenaline. Lia, he said, calm as ever. I know what you took. Bring it back, and we'll forget this happened. You stole my life, she snapped. You and Sloane. I've got proof, Kaitlyn's voice. Your orders. It's over. A pause. You're making a mistake, he said, his tone icing over. This doesn't end well for you. The line went dead. Lia's chest tightened. That wasn't a plea, it was a promise. She looked at Evan, his jaw set. He's not bluffing, she said. They've done this before. Kaitlyn said others disappeared. Yeah, Evan replied, pulling a name from memory. Sarah King, college kid, dug into Crestmont 5 years back. Asked me for help, then vanished. Cops called it a runaway. Bullshit. He stubbed out his cigarette. We're not disappearing. We've got the drive. We go public, carefully, or we're dead anyway. Lia nodded, fear and fury warring inside her. The USB burned in her pocket, Kaitlyn's truth, her stolen years, Mark's betrayal. They'd nearly caught her tonight, but she'd slipped through. She wasn't prey anymore, she was a threat. Evan mapped their next move, a safe house, encrypted backups, allies he trusted. But as they slipped into the night, Lia couldn't shake Mark's voice. This doesn't end well. Maybe not for him, she thought. She'd make sure of it. The game had changed. Sloane and Mark had power, but she had proof, and a reason to fight. Kaitlyn was still trapped in Greenvale, and Sarah's fate hung like a ghost between them. Lia wouldn't stop until the lies crumbled, even if it meant staring down the barrel of their next move. The fog thickened around her, hiding her steps, but not her purpose. They'd underestimated her once. They wouldn't get a second chance. Lia Carter crouched in the shadows of Evan Pierce's safe house, a rundown studio on the edge of Portland's industrial sprawl. The USB drive from the Crestmont office sat heavy in her pocket, its contents, Kaitlyn Reed's recorded testimony, Mark Wilson's damning memos, a ticking bomb. The chase through the alley still echoed in her bones, the gunshot, the splintered brick, Evan's grip pulling her to safety. Sloane's men had missed, but they wouldn't stop. Neither would she. Kaitlyn's words from Greenvale fueled her. You need evidence, or they'll bury you next. Lia had it now, and she'd wield it like a blade. Evan worked fast, his laptop glowing in the dim room. We can't trust the system, he said, fingers flying over keys. Sloane Wellness funds half the state, cops, judges, you name it. We go wide instead, whistleblower networks, indie press, people I've vetted. He split the drive's files into encrypted chunks, uploading copies to 6 contacts, a former DA, a human rights lawyer, 2 podcasters, a hacktivist group, and a retired editor who'd once broken a corruption ring. Each got a unique password, delivered via burner phones Lia bought with her last diner cash. If we go down, Evan said, this still hits daylight. Lia nodded, her jaw tight. How long? 24 hours, he replied. Enough time to draft a summary, names, dates, the works. Then we detonate. She watched him type, the weight of the past week pressing on her chest. Kaitlyn, locked away for 20 years. Sarah King, erased for asking questions. Mark, her adoptive father, a puppet master in Sloane's shadow. She trusted him once. Now she'd unravel him. Her phone buzzed. Mark again. She stared at the screen, then answered. Lia, he said, his voice smooth, controlled, like he was offering a bedtime story. You're in over your head. Bring me what you took, and we can fix this. You don't want Sloane's attention. Fix this. She spat, venom rising. You stole me from my mother. You buried her to protect him. I've got your signature, Mark, orders to keep her locked up. You don't scare me anymore. A beat of silence. You're naive, he said, eyes creeping in. This ends badly for you, and her, if you push it. Last chance. He hung up. Lia's hand shook, but not from fear. Rage steadied her. He thought she'd fold. He was wrong. The next morning, Evan sent the signal. The files dropped, first on a podcast called Uncovered Truths, raw audio of Kaitlyn's voice spilling across airwaves. Sloane ran trials, no consent. I saw them break. Then the lawyer posted scans of Mark's memos online, timestamped and verified. The hacktivists flooded social media with clips, hashtags trending, hashtag Crestmont exposed, hashtag Sloane Wellness lies. By noon, a Portland Tribune reporter broke the story wide. Decades-old scandal resurfaces. Nurse's daughter fights for justice. Lia's name stayed out. Evan's call, but Kaitlyn's didn't. The world heard her at last. Sloane Wellness issued a denial, all polished PR, but cracks showed fast. Protesters gathered outside their downtown HQ, chanting Kaitlyn's name. A whistleblower from Greenvale, a janitor, leaked security logs showing sedatives overprescribed for years. The state attorney general, cornered by public outcry, opened an investigation. Subpoenas hit Sloane, Mark, and 3 ex-Crestmont staff by week's end. Lia watched it unfold from Evan's safe house, TV muted, her breath shallow. They can't bury this, Evan said, almost to himself. Too many eyes now. She couldn't stay hidden forever. Kaitlyn was still in Greenvale, vulnerable if Sloane retaliated. I'm getting her out, Lia told Evan that night, resolve hardening. Before they decide she's a loose end. He made calls, contacts, and legal aid, while Lia packed her bag. By dawn, they drove north, a borrowed car rattling over frost-slick roads. Greenvale loomed ahead, quieter now, staff on edge as news vans circled nearby. Julia, the nurse, met them at a side door, her face drawn. She's ready, she whispered, handing over a release form forged. Lia guessed, but she didn't ask. They're scared here. Half the nurses quit. Take her and go. Lia found Kaitlyn in her room, sitting by the window, a packed bag at her feet. Her eyes were clearer, sharper, though her frame trembled. Mom, Lia said, kneeling beside her. Kaitlyn turned, a faint smile breaking through. You did it, she murmured, touching Lia's cheek. You found me. Always, Lia said, tears pricking her eyes. We're leaving. Together. They walked out, no alarms, no guards, just the crunch of gravel and Evan's engine idling. Julia waved once, then disappeared inside. The weeks blurred after that. Kaitlyn moved into a safe house under legal protection, her health fragile but her spirit waking. Therapists helped untangle decades of trauma, while lawyers built a case, class action, families of Crestmont victims joining the fight. Mark was indicted 3 months later, his beige coat swapped for cuffs on the courthouse steps. Sloane followed, his empire crumbling as sponsors fled. Lia didn't watch the arrests. She didn't need to. The news looped it enough. Then, a twist 6 months after the leak, Evan got a tip. A woman in a coastal Oregon town, living under an alias, matched Sarah King's description. Lia flew out, heart pounding, and found her in a diner, nervous, guarded, but alive. Sarah's eyes widened when Lia explained. You finished it, she said, voice cracking. I thought they'd won. They talked for hours, not about the past, but the future, plans to amplify the voiceless, to keep digging where others wouldn't. Lia returned to Kaitlyn, the two settling in a quiet Portland suburb. One spring day, they sat on a park bench, cherry blossoms drifting around them. Kaitlyn held her hand, stronger now. You gave me back my life, she said, her voice steady for the first time in years. Lia smiled, the weight of the fight lifting. You gave me mine. The trials dragged on, postponements, appeals, but the truth held. Mark stared at her in court once, expression blank, no remorse. You lost, she mouthed, and turned away. Justice wasn't instant, but it was real. Sloane's legacy rotted in headlines, his foundation bankrupt. Kaitlyn testified, her words unshakable. Lia rebuilt beside her, not as a victim, but a survivor who'd turned shadows into light. The world had listened, and for once it answered.